the general advice was that if I had some experience, my dad would take my decisions a little more seriously. So I eventually quit, and then I had a couple of ideas that came to my mind while I was in college. So I decided to act on one of those. I was setting up an F&B business, and then the second lockdown hit, so I was stuck at home. Attachment is a big red flag, in my opinion. People should be able to separate emotions from work. My current approach is to be intellectually curious, mindfully savage.
3, 2, 1, yeah!
Go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you have imagined.
And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work.
Courage is not doing things in the absence of fear. Courage is doing things despite the fear.
Growth comes from consistent action.
And you're realizing, hey, I'm not the only one with these problems.
Well, I'm very excited for this episode of the Be Your Own Boss podcast because normally I know the journey of the person I'm going to speak about really well. Okay, and then I ask questions to find out a bit, unearth those little gems I know are in there. This one's a bit unique, Keziah, because I know a bit about your journey, but more of it I need to explore and remains unexplored. So I'm very excited to learn about your journey as the audience does as well. So this should be exciting and might go off the rails a little bit. I feel like that warning is important as well. But thank you so much for making it. Thank you also for starting this podcast. Just before we started, you making me Google myself. That was absolutely terrifying. There are certain companies that should not be allowed to exist where my number has popped up like a gazillion times. So thank you for terrifying me at the start of this podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Rashid. Thanks for having me. And no problem at all. I feel like personal branding is my thing. So I love to announce it as much as possible. So my name is Keziah, obviously, Keziah Korah. I think the alliteration works really well to my advantage. And I'm the founder of Lynkk, which is a B2B LinkedIn marketing company. I've obviously had a bit of an up and down journey as every other founder has. So started off with LinkedIn marketing, pivoted into a generative AI model, and then ChatGPT came out. So it kind of made me reassess whether this is truly my passion. And now I have sort of switched to building my personal brand. So that's my current trajectory. And it's been a great shift because I've also seen that shift in my business. And I'm kind of glad to see where I'm at and excited about this journey.
Okay, awesome. I love that straight up. There's so many different parts of your journey that you've brought out. And I'd love to deep dive into all of it and perhaps even zoom out and look at all of it at once. So just to start off, to let you know the purpose of this podcast and the reason why this podcast exists is I listen to a lot of podcasts myself. And one of the things I kept going back to is that I was incredibly frustrated that all the podcasts out there are about entrepreneurs who've made it, telling you how they made it and how every move was a piece of genius and everything worked out really well. And it was really hard to actually relate to all of it because on the journey, it's not as sexy as it looks like after you've quote unquote made it. So the purpose of this podcast is to really understand what's happening on the journey right now, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the in-between stuff, not just the business cool strategy stuff that you're doing, but really what's going on with you as an entrepreneur. So my one request in this podcast would be to be as vulnerable and candid as is humanly possible, because that's where our listeners will really get the value from.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up because one of the biggest things you learn about marketing is emotion, and relatability is a huge factor, right? So being able to share personal insights is what drives traction and connection, and that's what builds trust. So I'm also glad that you brought up successful individuals sharing their stories, because when you start off, you're always told to look to those that have made it for inspiration, kind of learn through their journey and then see what applies to your life or how you could adapt that to your life and kind of grow from there, right? So it's super important to listen to those individuals as well. But as I said before, as an entrepreneur, when you go up and down, sometimes during the lows, it's really good to connect with and relate to individuals that are not there yet, because then you kind of build a community around that, which Jigsaw has done and made it a lot better for all of us self-starters out there. And it kind of helps you propel you to that level of success that you meant.
Kezia, I know you've said you pivoted a couple of times and now you're into the personal branding space. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to start at the beginning of your entrepreneurial adventure. So can you tell us a little bit about your origin story as an entrepreneur? How did you get into starting whatever it is that you started when you first started, the first thing you started?
I guess similar to a lot of other Indian kids, I had a very Indian pivot into this career. So I graduated university in the US and then came back to India with the intent to take over the family business. But being a girl and a child of your parents, your opinions and decisions are not taken seriously. And I couldn't handle that because I felt like I was capable enough to be a decision maker, right? So I did what everyone told me and got a job at a startup because the goal was to eventually take over the family business or set up something of my own.
Right.
So the general advice was that if I had some experience, my dad would take my decisions a little more seriously, right?
Okay.
So I did that and worked at a startup for about 10 months where I gained a lot of LinkedIn experience. So I handled all of their LinkedIn sales and marketing, and that's where I built up my LinkedIn skills. And after a point, I kind of felt that my growth was stagnating in that role. And I think now people have understood that shift where if you're not growing, you quit and do something else. But I was still in that in-between generation where everyone was like, you need to have a job for at least 1 year to show some sort of stability on your resume.
You make me seem so old because in my time, it used to be like you've got to get 3 or 5 years on there. Otherwise, it doesn't count. But even a year seems like a long time when you're in it, right? Yeah.
So I was done by about 6 months in terms of my role had become really specialized, and that's fine for certain people, but based on the career I wanted, it didn't make sense for me. But then I stayed on till month 10, which I felt like was a cost to me as well as the company. If I just quit, maybe I would have performed better elsewhere, and maybe they could have hired someone that was more motivated in the role at the time, right? Being extremely candid right there. So I eventually quit. And then I had a couple of ideas that came to my mind while I was in college. So I decided to act on one of those. I was setting up an F&B business, and then the second lockdown hit. So I was stuck at home and all the... Yeah.
So hold on. Your first idea of your own thing was an F&B business just before COVID.
I didn't know second wave was coming in.
Yeah,
right?
of course. That sucks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I started doing that, and then COVID hit and it was lockdowns and all the chefs disappeared from Bangalore and went back to their hometowns. So I was stuck at home.
I'm sorry I'm laughing, but it seems so obscenely cruel, the timing of it all.
No, I think it worked out really well in my advantage because at the same time I was working part-time for a family friend and my previous business coach and doing her LinkedIn marketing. So just to generate some income and not be completely dependent on my parents while I was setting up. And then this happened. So then she, from that business coach perspective, gave me the advice to set up my own LinkedIn marketing company because I was able to generate leads for her.
Right.
And she saw that I was skilled at what I was doing. So I got some advice from my other entrepreneur friends, etc. and kind of figured out that I had an existing client base because everyone had seen my LinkedIn skills and they needed LinkedIn marketing, right? There was a need for it. And so I had a couple of clients that I could start with as soon as I started. So I set that up, started doing a lot of courses around marketing because my background is economics, completely different.
Got it.
So I built a little more of my skills, kind of made it more robust, and then started kind of building up my team and all of that. But I'm not the biggest fan of a services business. I like how the tech world works, and the goal was to always move to product. So from day one, we started to collect data and figure out what we could automate and end up with that pivot to tech product 9 months into our...
I'm just going to pause you here because I'm curious. When on this journey did you figure out that you wanted to think about the tech side of things? Was it all the way through and you knew services as a stepping stone, or was there an aha moment at some point where you went, nah, not for me, I want to do the tech side? Like,
before I started.
okay, so you knew.
So I interned at an ad agency in about 2017, and I'd seen the culture there. So I knew I did not want to be in that business. But sometimes as an entrepreneur, there are 3 circles that you look for, and one of them is monetization, right? So I was trying to monetize on my skills because I'm also passionate about helping others. So it worked out that way. But I knew that I wouldn't be able to do this for more than a year. I would
Got it.
probably burn out, right?
Okay.
And I think self-awareness is key.
Yeah, and that's why I asked that question, because a lot of people we've had on this podcast, and of course the self-starters in the Jigsaw community, it's very hard when you're going into something to know that the thing you are going into is not the thing you eventually want to be in, and you're still going to struggle and figure out how to sort of make it work. So that self-awareness is, I'm sure, an asset for you, not just in business, but in other spaces of life as well. So yeah, kudos, because I find it relatable, because we set out Jigsaw thinking maybe whenever we started 4 years ago now. Initially, it was services that we offered. And then it took me a while to realize why I'm not super excited about scaling what currently exists, which was the services piece. So you definitely had that self-awareness at the start. I wish I had it, but I didn't at the time.
I mean, I guess it does require a lot of self-work and therapy, which is something that's usually shunned upon in India, but it's really great. And if anyone has watched Billions, the TV show, everyone goes to Wendy.
Yeah.
That as a successful individual, you're going to go through extreme emotions, like extremely high stress levels, anxiety, and you need someone that can just ground you and validate or help you understand what's going on in your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you a lot more clarity and direction in terms of setting up your business in the right way without hurting other people.
And if you don't mind, and if you're comfortable talking about this, is working with a therapist something you were doing before your entrepreneurial journey and throughout, and or was it triggered by the stresses of the entrepreneurial journey, or something completely different?
Yeah, it was triggered by something in my personal life. I was a little reluctant to start therapy when I was suggested that I should by ex-bosses, etc., who realized I had really high stress levels. But from when I started being an entrepreneur, I started using therapy to also help my work life, where I saw a lot of results, and it would help me in a lot of situations. So I'm really thankful for that. But back to Lynkk as a business, we started working with clients, collecting data, and then by the 9th month, we kind of figured out that there was, so through the entire client journey, we figured out there was a lot of toxic client culture, which I'd also seen in my internship.
At the ad agency? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. So the goal was to figure out how we could mitigate toxic work culture in India, because I love to pick topics.
Super hard topics. Yeah. Okay. Because that sounds like you going, I'm going to solve traffic in Bangalore. It's like that level of a challenge.
But I feel like this is a little more achievable. So
then traffic? Yes. Okay.
100%.
Agreed.
I try to find, but again, right? So how this works is VCs don't care about such issues. They care about monetization. And so we worked backwards from there, that being our mission statement. We understood that there's a lot of inefficiency and loss of productivity in agencies in India by the way that they're set up, the way that they work. Time management is something that really lacks here. Planning and organization is just not a thing. You have WhatsApp groups, and that's how business is conducted. Whereas I worked in the US prior to this, and you have Microsoft Teams, you have Slack, you have all of these channels that are dedicated to work communication, which helps you also maintain a certain level of work-life
and keep things separate.
Yeah. Whereas in India, I've seen from my own personal experience as well as other friends that work at agencies, you open WhatsApp and then you see a million group conversations relating to work and your personal life. So how do you get that break from work in terms of physical as well as mental, right? You're always thinking about work. And someone like me, I have notification OCD. My phone is on DND all the time.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, just because I have this urge to click into everything and act on it immediately.
Yeah.
So this helps me kind of focus on what I need to, rather than be sucked up into every single thing that pops up, right? So we decided to build a tool that would help cut down on the time spent doing things. So
got it.
Fast forward to 2023. Now that we have so much knowledge around AI, it's a generative AI tool, right?
Right.
So what it did essentially was similar to ChatGPT, but instead of typing in keywords to get just a fixed output, you would get a whole LinkedIn post, for instance.
Got it.
So our business model is very B2B marketing focused, and we had B2B marketing frameworks that are common across almost all B2B companies. So when you say that you want to do a hiring post, you just type that in and then it gives you a completely personalized, customized hiring post.
Gotcha.
Yeah, on a marketing framework that we used for our clients, which Apple uses for its products, and it obviously clearly works really well, right?
Yeah.
So
I have a question here. So at the time when you were doing this, it wasn't that everybody in the world was going, ooh, generative AI, what a cool space to be in, right? Because it was pre-GPT. Wow, is that a thing? Is that a timeline thing? Like pre-COVID, post-COVID, now it's pre-GPT? Okay, wow. Just realized that happened in my mind just now. Did you find it hard to explain to people what you were building, or would you just show it to them and so they got it? Or was there resistance initially?
no, I'm very glad that we're having this conversation post GPT because it saved about like 10 minutes of explanation. They did not understand it. Now it's a lot easier to
Yeah.
understand. So in a way, ChatGPT kind of gave us validation as well,
Mhm.
market validation.
Yep.
But ChatGPT coming out and like the whole process of us figuring out how to position ourselves to be different from them gave me that clarity, and self-awareness kicked in again. And I was like, do I really want to pursue marketing for the next 3 years? And I'm really passionate to build a product. I'm passionate about working with evolving tech, but I don't know if I want to stick to marketing going forward.
Got it.
I acquire, build, and use my skills on the services side, but I feel like with tech product, I kind of want to focus on a different industry or niche, which is something that I'm still figuring out. And so that's why I've kind of pivoted now to focusing on just building my personal brand. If you've noticed in the past year, I've done a lot more LinkedIn.
Yes, I've noticed.
Yeah. Kind of podcasts, webinars, as well as just meeting individuals across the world, because I love to travel, but sometimes with work, it's a little restricted, right? So when I am stuck in Bangalore, I tend to get on calls and try to meet people virtually. I've met a lot of cool individuals across India, Europe, South Africa in the past few months. So that's been really exciting. And personal branding is something that is super cool and also getting a lot of traction right now. People are understanding the importance of a personal brand, which has also translated to good business for us, because that shift in information asymmetry between clients and us, where pre-GPT, or I'm not sure what the shift is with personal branding, we would have clients come to us because they knew that they had to do some form of B2B marketing
Right.
or lead generation, but they did not want to establish their personal brand.
Got it.
Whereas in 23, we've had clients reach out with requests to set up their personal brand. So that's been a lot better. It translates to better client relationships because there's less back and forth, and it's a lot easier.
I guess you're not spending too much time explaining to people, hey, this is why we're doing it. Personal branding is important. And you don't have to sit and make that case about personal branding. You can just get to it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
It's like that's been the biggest shift, and it's so refreshing because in the past month, I had a client reach out, a new potential client, and she referenced Harvard Business Review's article on building a personal brand. So when a client comes to you with some information and research,
Yeah, dream client, lock them down.
literally, it felt like a huge win, and that's been my biggest moment of joy in the past month or so.
This is reminding me of when I started out in Bangalore. Design thinking wasn't a thing. And at the time, I was just doing design thinking coaching and workshops and fellowships and things like that. And so anytime Stanford put out a latest design thinking post, I would just try and plaster it everywhere, physically, through digital media, whatever it is, so that people realize it's not me saying this is important. So I totally get it when you say somebody else comes to you with, hey, here's this external piece of validation about what you're doing. That sounds pretty cool. One of the things I am curious about is with entrepreneurship, there's this entire school of thought of build something great, stick it out, hard work, keep going, never give up, etc. Has it ever crossed your mind? Because it feels like, okay, let me give you some context. It feels like you're in a very healthy space of making a self-aware decision of, hey, I'll shift from doing X to doing Y to doing Z because this is what I want to focus on. And this is where I think I can create impact. But I know a lot of self-starters who find it incredibly hard to make those pivots because it feels to them like starting from scratch in a new space is equal to failing at the old space. Did that ever cross your mind, or how did you process these shifts? Did it take you time, or was it a snap of the fingers? Was it easy? Was it hard when you're making these pivots, and the latest one you made?
I would say a lot of it kind of goes back into my first job. So with my first job, I had the pleasure of working with Vivan. And during the 10 months that I was there, the company that was at first Work Network pivoted 3 times
Gotcha.
during my journey. So I saw that pivoting quick helps because it really helps you understand where you need to get, and it kind of saves you a lot of the time building that you would spend building something that you're not going to use or doesn't necessarily get you that product market fit, right? So that was great to see. And then another thing is in terms of self-awareness, I do a lot of things for self-improvement and self-development. And then a lot of the research or learnings that you find, you learn that with startups. And generally in life, like this applies with the stock market as well. When you make a mistake or what we view as a failure, it's important to focus on your learning from that rather than to dwell in it and then kind of get out of it as soon as possible. So I view failures as stepping stones to success because you learn what not to do when you're taking that next step.
Yep.
And I think that learning and that understanding is what's helped me get ahead, because even with my tech product, we built out phase 1 of it, which was expensive, right? It was a cost. And I can look at that as a sunk cost and feel sad about it, which I do, but then I don't let that consume me. Instead, I look at it as maybe I could have like spent 10x that, spent a year of my life building that, and then realized that I didn't want to do it, which would have been a much larger cost. And so it's okay to kind of experience these smaller costs than deal with really large ones.
Okay, I fucking love what you just said, because I feel like that is my way of looking at things all of the time, not just with business, but in absolutely everything I do, right? So I used to work at Accenture in London, and then I came back and decided to start my own thing and start a social enterprise. And at that point in time, and still a few wonderful friends of mine still tell me it was a really, really stupid decision to do that. And the key thing was not, hey, you're set up, you can progress. It was, you went to business school and you've already committed 2.5 years to Accenture. What a waste if you move on from it, because those 2.5 years could have led to so much success. And I feel like that is level 1 thinking. Level 2 thinking is to go and say exactly what you said, which is, okay, I've invested 2.5 years. My life probably has another, hopefully, is this word? I don't know. Hopefully has another 50, 60 years at least. Am I going to let 2.5 years define what the remaining 60 are going to be? And I feel like that's a much healthier way to look at a situation. And I love that you're doing that. And I hope this message gets across to people listening in, because I often find people pivoting way too slowly because they're so attached to what they've built, especially if they've put time and money into it. So emotion is one thing, but if you put time and money into it and you talk about it to everyone, then you feel the social pressure of, I have to keep this thing going. And you feel sort of trapped. So it's great to see someone who's not feeling that and is able to sort of navigate that stuff as well. Do you see it around you?
Yeah, I would say that's a huge red flag to me. Because exactly what you said about level 1 thinking, right? In this Vex King book that I read, he wanted to be, so a little bit of background, he is from a lower income household in the UK, and his goal was to be really successful. And then he spoke about that to everyone in his community, and they were kind of just like, what's wrong with you? And they completely dismissed his idea. And then I don't remember how, but he discovered that instead of looking within his community, he should look at people that he wants to be like and aspires to be like, and then learned about their lives, their journeys, and then understood that what he said or did made sense. And so that's how he got his validation, and he followed their success path or growth journey and was able to kind of bring himself up to the millions of followers he has now.
Gotcha.
As a result of that, not what his immediate surroundings said, because sometimes, you're maybe not in the right community, right?
Yeah.
So attachment is a big red flag, in my opinion. People should be able to separate emotions from work and focus on the end goal, right? And also have a system and process, etc. So Ray Dalio is actually a great source of inspiration for me. He posts a lot of general principles that you can learn a lot about and apply that to your business and team and management, and also learning from failures. In terms of what you said about individuals kind of around you not understanding what you're doing or dismissing things, I would say that if you are making people question what you're doing something right. Because the general public is not where you need your validation.
Yeah.
Sure, they may need to buy your product if it's easy.
Sure.
But I would say it's more important that like-minded individuals give you that validation rather than majority of the population, because a lot of them are pursuing something completely different where they're brainwashed and have that mass mentality mindset, right? So when you are an entrepreneur, risk taker, or a founder, you're trying to do something different, something unique. And so you can't rely on general information to get there.
Yep.
And I've kind of shifted my personal brand a bit recently, but my previous slogan was "Let's break Indian norms." And I generally had so many people advise me to stay at my job, which I feel like was one of the worst decisions I could have made at the time. And so now my current approach is to be intellectually curious, mindfully savage, which means I'm going to be curious, but still be mindful in the way that I don't take into account people whose opinions matter.
I love that. I would have said that in a much more boring way. I would have said like being balanced, but you're very clearly in the personal branding space and I am not. No, so that sounds really cool. Okay, so I've found out a lot about how you think and your journey so far and what's worked for you. What has not? What has been something that has been continuously been challenging for you to figure out as an entrepreneur, that it still irks you? You're not like operating at 10 on 10 because there's this tiny thing you sort of need to get over. Is there something like that that has been with you throughout and you're tackling with? Does that monster exist?
I think this would be another example that you might be familiar with, but I think my biggest challenge till date, it's improved a lot now, but back in the day was firing fast.
Okay.
Yeah. So being an overly empathetic individual and a rescuer personality, for those who go to therapy, they know what that means. For others, they can Google it and try to figure it out. I had this problem where I would try to kind of put my employees ahead of my business, or where I would see the potential in other people before they saw it in themselves and try to help them get to that level of personal growth or professional growth, right? And I took a lot of hits to my business as a result of that. A lot of money and time wasted, and again, like maybe scarring situations in terms of emotional damage because their emotions and work were probably overlapping. So from our conversation about a year ago, I learned that it's very important to fire quick. And that's something that I've now taken into account, and I work with that a lot more. But I still find it really challenging to keep my empathetic nature towards other people aside. What I've understood is that getting other opinions helps me deal with it. So even though it's something that I'm still working on, I avoid it by getting a second opinion.
Okay.
So that kind of helps me stay true to my...
Got it. So yeah, it seems like there is a clear challenge, but again, your self-awareness means that you know that it's a challenge and you have a way to tackle it. And I think that's so important, because a lot of us think that we have to suddenly become these superstars who can deal with absolutely everything perfectly. And that's not the case. You're allowed to ask for help and get help at particular things. And the first step is be aware and then take action to get help, right? And I love that it's actually not, I'm not saying it's simple, but it's not rocket science to figure out, hey, this is a problem for me. I'm not good at this. There might be somebody else who can give me some insight on it, and then I can move forward. Yeah, that actually, I guess, seems pretty straightforward.
Because, I mean, I'm only 26, but for even individuals that are like 40, you can't be a master of everything, right? And so it's important to understand where your weaknesses lie and not have it be a weakness for the rest of your life, but it's okay if it's at least a work in progress, because then there's some action. The key to life is awareness and then action, because
Yep.
people are aware, but they don't do anything about it. So then it's kind of
Uh,
like you might as well just not be aware at that point, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing.
You're not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So action is key. And as long as you are taking steps to make sure you use your awareness in the right way, it doesn't matter if you have certain weaknesses, because we're not Superman. Like, we can't be great at everything, right?
Yeah. This is just making me remember that somebody asked me once, I think it was after like my TED talk, I was like, oh, I'm going to get questions about this particular topic I've talked about. And then the first question was, define entrepreneurship. And I was like, what? Like, there are so many ways to do it. And then I realized that for me, very, very selfishly and personally, entrepreneurship is the greatest self-discovery adventure of all time. It's the fastest, most effective way to find out about yourself, how you navigate, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you like to do, etc. And I'm getting a lot of that vibe from you as well, where you've discovered so much about yourself and you're using it as this. You obviously want to create impact and be good at what you do, but it's also a little game with yourself to figure out, how you deal with different situations, which seems like pretty fun.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, because I would say pre-entrepreneurship as well as therapy, I had this approach to life, which I guess the general mass does as well, which is we in India especially tend to follow a corrective way of living rather than a preventative. And what that means is, in the past, I would kind of do something wrong, then learn from the situation, and then work to kind of fix that going forward.
Yep.
But now, going to therapy, for instance, being a good example of that, is I have a preventative approach to the way I live my life, which means I do things in a way that avoid a negative situation. For instance, burnout, right? So what you said about balance earlier, so this intellectually curious, mindfully savage evolved from balance. I used to talk about work-life balance a lot because I burnt out real bad from work in between. And then that was a big learning to understand that I now need to focus on a more balanced or sustainable way of working to ensure that I don't burn out. And I've not burnt out since, which is great, right? But most people kind of let that negative experience take over and then focus on kind of actioning out something positive, which saves you. It's like costs you a lot of time and money. You might as well just try to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Rather than...
Better to eat healthy than to have croissant all day, every day. Okay. Got it. Okay, we've talked about a lot of deep stuff for a while, so I want to switch gears a little bit. We have a fun little segment called Jaldi with Jigsaw, where I'm just going to ask you a few rapid fire questions. So less thinking than you've done on this podcast so far with these answers, please. Okay, so I've got about like 10 of them. I don't remember them, so I have notes. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Oh, no.
Though. What if I didn't speak Hindi?
What if you didn't speak Hindi? Then we would have a problem with our alliteration because I couldn't find an English word with J to figure this out. So if you have any ideas, I'm more than happy to take those on. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's start with Jaldi or fast with Chicks. Thank you. Okay. Here are some questions. Okay. What's your go-to karaoke song?
Love Nandistan by Rihanna and Kanye, because I can do.
What? So it's just you doing? Okay, wow. Okay, Jaldi, sorry. Okay, that's incredible. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Probably to be invisible.
Creepy. Okay. What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Chocolate.
Nice. Straight down the road. Okay. How do you switch off?
I try to meditate, but I think as someone that's like hypersensitive or overstimulated all the time, turning off lights is great.
Okay. Have you tried one of those sensory deprivation things? It sounds terrifying. Yeah.
They're really, really great. I know people that have tried it out and recommended it.
Yeah.
I'm claustrophobic, so I haven't.
Okay. I'm terrified. I don't think I could do it. Okay. Okay. You have to answer this one. If you could switch lives with anyone for a day and the answer can't be with no one, I'm happy with it. No. Who would it be?
Does that person have to be alive?
No. Okay, I'll allow it. I'm curious now.
Probably Steve Jobs, just because there are a lot of other successful entrepreneurs out there, past or late entrepreneurs. But Steve Jobs is just someone that I've known from when I was really young because of the iPhone.
Right.
I love Apple, so you can't cut.
Okay, cool. Do you have a favorite board game or video game or sport?
I have all.
Okay, give me all three then.
Okay,
Great.
board game Monopoly because money. And real estate.
Okay, cool. That was simple.
Video game probably FIFA or 2K.
Okay,
FIFA 2K and F1 actually. Those are my
2K is NBA, right? Okay, cool.
sorry. Because they also reflect the real life sports that I play.
Got it.
My main sport is driving, although I don't do it professionally.
You drive for fun in Bangalore traffic, just to clarify, so that everybody is aware.
I stopped.
Okay, cool.
Post COVID, it was great.
Right, for a
After
bit.
6 months down the line, I stopped driving.
Yeah.
I only drive really early in the morning or like on Sunday when there's relatively less.
Yeah, okay, so you don't have to scream at everyone all the
Yeah,
time.
I
Okay.
have major rage, so this is for my own peace and theirs. Football, basketball, and we recently started frisbee, but like football and basketball.
Okay, cool. We should be playing all of these things together at some point because I love football, I love FIFA, and Monopoly used to be my favorite board game growing up, and I used to beat all my friends at it all the time. Yeah, yeah, they hate it. They stop playing with me, and they keep making outrageous deals. Whenever I try and make a sensible deal, they're like 8,000 for Park Lane, and I'm like, anyway, this gets me very emotional. A couple of more questions. What's the best vacation you've ever taken?
Can I have like two up there?
I mean, yeah, there's no specific rules in this game.
I would say Italy and the Maldives, because one was kind of like that city cultural food experience where you learn a lot.
Yeah.
And then Maldives was like relaxation because I love the beach and water sports. Like I have like 10,000 times more energy than in the water than I do on land.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. And finally, who's your biggest cheerleader? Okay, go for it.
But I would say most recently, biggest shout out goes to my friend Zora Seth, who never fails to thank me every second of the day. Anytime I help her out, no matter how small it may be, she makes me feel so appreciated and valued. And I think those are the kind of people you need to have around.
Yeah, absolutely invaluable and priceless. I lied when I said last question because I'm supposed to ask you one more. 3 words to define a jigsaw thinker.
A risk taker, self-starter, different.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. Well, you nailed Jaldi with Jigsaw, and you've given us a great recommendation on, well, we're waiting for a recommendation on the name to make it more inclusive as well. I think I have one final question before we sign off, which is what's next for Keziah?
So at least for the next few months till the end of this year, I'm really focusing on building my personal brand because I've learned a lot about it from a company perspective as well as an individual. So that's my goal for the next year. Currently assessing whether an executive MBA makes sense for me or not, because as an entrepreneur, you get a lot more experience on the job than in school.
Yep.
But an MBA essentially provides you with a great network, which is also really good for your professional as well as personal growth, right? Networking is a huge part of business that we don't necessarily talk about. And so I'm kind of assessing whether I plan to get ideas for my next tech product by working or by doing an MBA.
Gotcha.
Right. So.
But that's the goal. The tech product is still something you want to get into.
Yeah. And the goal is to kind of spend 1 month outside India, preferably Europe, because I've lived in the US for long enough now. Because new experiences forms new neural pathways in your brain. And so experiencing a new country may help me come up with a lot more innovative, creative ideas than what I'm limited to being here, as well as that difference between a developed and developing country helps you identify what's still missing here and kind of adapt that to the Indian.
Yeah. As someone who's, the last 3 years now, I have done 1 month trips 4 or 5 times. I'm very grateful and privileged to be in that situation. So if it's possible, I cannot recommend it enough because it really does open up so many possibilities, opportunities, types of conversation that you can't sort of predict what's going to happen and what return on investment you're going to get, but it's normally, at least it's exponential in terms of the return it can give you. So yeah, I'd recommend that. Where can people follow you if they want to interact a bit more with you and your personal brand?
Yeah. for me personally, because I work in the B2B space, LinkedIn would be my go-to. You can also learn about me on my website, but that's currently being revamped, so maybe in a week or so.
Okay.
But just as general unsolicited advice that I like to give, if you work in either the B2C or B2B space, it's really important to have at least one social channel activated. So if you're B2C, maybe Instagram or Twitter. If you're B2B, LinkedIn is the go-to. And I would highly recommend that everyone set up some form of a personal brand, because it can help you go a long way.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey. So, what I said at the start, that please share vulnerably and candidly. I think you smashed that out of the park, and that's the most important thing. So thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Rashid, for having me. It was lovely being a part.
Cool. Take care. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. We're Jigsaw Thinking, home of the self-starters. If you're interested in being your own boss, head to jigsawthinking.com or drop us a DM at Jigsaw Thinking on Instagram.